The storm had no mercy. Halifax was drowning in sheets of snow and sleet that lashed the city as though nature itself had grown vengeful. It was the kind of storm that erased boundaries, swallowing streets, burying cars, smothering every light until the city looked like it had been abandoned to darkness. Waves from the harbor hammered against the frozen docks, spraying salt and ice into the wind, as if the Atlantic itself had chosen this night to roar with unrelenting fury. Amid that chaos, Clarraine Mitchell sat hunched in the attic of a worn-down row house, her fingers stiff from the cold as she clutched a folder of documents that had rewritten the entire story of her life. She had always believed she was the eldest daughter in a struggling family, born with an invisible badge of responsibility strapped across her chest. She had thought her sacrifices were noble, her endless labor a duty born of love and necessity. Yet the brittle papers in her lap told another truth. One she could neither deny nor escape. She was not who she thought she was. She had never been. The adoption certificate was yellowed, creased at the edges as though it had been folded and hidden for decades. It bore her name, but not the one she had carried all her life. Sophia Grace Winters. It read. A name she had never heard, but one that now pulsed like a phantom heartbeat in her veins. Beneath it, the signatures of strangers, her real parents, Thomas and Elizabeth Winters, marked as deceased. A death certificate confirmed it. They had died in a car accident when she was just 11 months old. There was even a newspaper clipping, brittle and fading, recounting the wreck on a frozen highway near New Brunswick, their infant daughter miraculously surviving. And then came the final blow: the trust fund, a settlement established by an insurance company, intended to provide for her care, her education, her adult life. For 25 years it had been administered by James and Marianne Mitchell, the people she had called her parents. It had been enough to cover tuition, housing, a future she had never been allowed to dream of. But the money was gone. Every dollar had been siphoned off, redirected into mortgage payments, her siblings' education, even the car her younger sister drove proudly while Clarraine trudged home from double shifts on foot. Her life of endless sacrifice had not been unfortunate circumstance. It had been theft, deliberate and relentless, dressed in the disguise of parental care. Her throat ached, but no sound came out. The storm outside howled on her behalf, rattling the window frame as though urging her to finally understand the magnitude of betrayal. She pressed her palms against the papers, as if sheer pressure could force them to dissolve, but the truth clung to her skin like frostbite. 27 years of obedience, of deferred dreams, of resilience praised by everyone but compensated by no one, now revealed to be nothing more than exploitation. She thought back to her teenage years, to mornings when she rose at 4:30 to knead dough in a bakery before racing to school, the smell of yeast clinging to her clothes as she slid into class barely awake. Her peers whispered about parties, dances, trips to Cape Breton in the summer, while she calculated how many loaves she needed to sell to cover the week's grocery bill. Her volleyball coach had once told her she had the makings of a scholarship athlete, but she had quit the team after too many missed practices. That dream had died quietly, smothered beneath exhaustion, replaced by shifts at the grocery store and nights cleaning offices for strangers who would never know her name. She had thought she was strong. She had thought she was noble. Now she knew she had been deceived. Her siblings had lived untouched by hardship. They had birthdays celebrated in restaurants, tuition paid without hesitation, even cars gifted in the name of love. She had smiled for photos, contributed her earnings to the bill, swallowed bitterness like medicine. When she had asked why her own education could not be funded, why she must settle for night classes at community college, the answers were always vague. There was no money. Times were hard. She was resilient enough to manage. But now the truth carved into her chest with a blade's precision. The money had always been there. It simply had not been hers to use, though legally and morally, it had belonged to her. The betrayal was not just theft, it was identity theft, future theft, life theft. Her life had not always felt like a sentence. In the earliest years, Clarraine had believed she was part of a family that, though modest and often stretched thin, was whole. Summers in Halifax meant afternoons at the Citadel Hill Park, where her father spread blankets on the grass and her mother passed out sandwiches wrapped in wax paper. Winters meant heavy boots and mittens, the crunch of snow underfoot, mugs of cocoa warming their hands as they pressed close around the wood stove. Those moments were stitched into her earliest memories, like bright patches sewn onto a quilt, comforting, familiar, deceptively permanent. But permanence was an illusion. At 16, the fragile fabric of their life tore open. Her father, once steady in construction and maintenance, came home with defeat etched into his shoulders. The layoffs had gutted entire crews, and he was among the discarded. Clarraine remembered his silence at the dinner table that evening more than any words. The scrape of utensils against plates felt louder than thunder. Her mother murmured reassurance, but her eyes betrayed worry. Her voice frayed with fatigue. Weeks passed, and no new job came. Construction slowed, maintenance positions filled too quickly, and the city seemed to have no place for him anymore. Her mother shouldered more hours at the hospital, the strain carving hollows beneath her cheekbones, her posture bending under invisible weights. Clarraine watched her stagger home, shoes scuffed, hands trembling, headaches etched into her face. The walls of the house echoed with quiet desperation. Bills multiplied, envelopes stacked on the counter, red numbers underlined with urgency. Groceries grew sparse. The threat of losing the house hovered in every hushed argument she overheard. It was then, standing in the shadow of impending collapse, that Clarraine made the decision that would define her life. She would work. The bakery on Barrington Street smelled of sugar and yeast, a deceptive sweetness masking the back-breaking labor behind it. At dawn, while the city still slept, she tied her apron, dusted her hands with flour, and learned to shape dough in the chill of early morning. Her classmates awoke hours later in warm beds, but she was already sore, already weary. She had convinced herself it was temporary, a bridge until her father found stability again. Yet bridges turned to roads, and roads to endless journeys. From the bakery she went to school, her eyes heavy, her stomach often empty, her mind a battlefield between fatigue and determination. After school, she hurried to the grocery store, scanning barcodes, stocking shelves, bagging goods with practiced efficiency. By the time she stumbled home, the day had already consumed her. Yet homework waited like a final cruelty. Sleep was rationed in hours too few to restore her. Volleyball had once been her escape. On the court she had found freedom, adrenaline, the brief illusion of flight as she leapt for a serve. Coaches whispered about scholarships, about a future built on talent, but exhaustion eroded her edge. She missed practices, lagged behind in drills, her body betraying her. When her coach told her she could not balance both worlds, she folded the dream away. It was the first coffin she nailed shut, one of many to come. Her siblings did not share her burdens. Elise lingered in malls with friends, returning with shopping bags, her laughter careless. Marcus sank into video games, headphones sealing him off from reality. When Clarraine asked for help, she was met with rolled eyes, excuses, shrugs. Chores piled up, dust thickened, laundry overflowed. The house became a mirror of neglect, yet no one else stepped forward. Her parents, far from correcting the imbalance, deepened it. They looked at Clarraine with eyes that glistened with gratitude and guilt, telling her she was strong, that she could handle what others could not. The words fell like chains. Because she could handle it. She was required to. Because she was strong. She was denied the right to weakness. The inequity stretched into years. Elise received tuition money, housing allowances, even gifts to celebrate milestones. Marcus's dreams of private university were nurtured with secret savings Clarine only discovered later. For her, there was always the same refrain: there isn't enough. Every dollar she earned was absorbed into bills, into survival, into other people's futures. Her own was postponed indefinitely. She watched from the sidelines as friends lived lives she could only imagine. Photos of dorm rooms decorated with posters, of road trips to Montreal, of laughter around bonfires filled her feeds. She liked their posts, congratulated their achievements, and returned to her double shifts. Isolation became her closest companion. Graduation from community college should have been a moment of pride. Instead, it was another solitary milestone. She walked across the stage, accepted the diploma, and descended into anonymity. Her family absent with excuses that cut deeper than words. The certificate sat unopened on her dresser, a symbol of effort unnoticed, sacrifice unacknowledged. By her early 20s, Clarine had been sculpted into a figure of endurance. Her body bore calluses, her face shadows of sleepless nights. She had given years of her youth to ensure the survival of a household that never repaid her devotion. And yet, when Elise unwrapped an expensive car as a birthday gift, Clarine forced a smile, swallowing the bitterness that threatened to choke her. Every unspoken resentment layered itself within her, compacted until it formed something hard, unyielding. She told herself it was worth it, that love required sacrifice. But deep within, a voice whispered that love was not supposed to drain, not supposed to consume, not supposed to demand endless giving without return. She silenced the voice then. But it grew stronger with every passing year. The years blurred into one another. Elise graduated, still supported by the family. Marcus entered university, his tuition fully covered. Clarine remained the provider, the invisible foundation upon which their lives were built. She told herself it was duty, but the cracks widened. Duty felt like prison. By 26, she was weary beyond her years. Her body ached, her spirit sagged, her future dimmed. She had lived a decade as a shadow of herself, convinced it was inevitable. But inevitability was another lie. Beneath it all, betrayal simmered, waiting for the day truth would unmask it. That day had come in the storm. The folder revealed what she had long suspected but never dared to believe, that her suffering was not simply unfair, but engineered. She had not been unlucky. She had been deceived from the very beginning. The night of revelation bled into morning with cruel indifference. The storm outside had softened into silence, the city covered in a crystalline sheet of ice that sparkled as though mocking the devastation inside Clarine's chest. She had not slept. The documents lay scattered across the attic floor like fragments of her shattered identity, and she had sat among them all night, alternately numb and raging, trembling and cold. The adoption certificate was a wound that would never fully close. Sophia Grace Winters. The name echoed in her mind, haunting and foreign, yet undeniably hers. To discover at 27 that she had been living under a false identity was more than disorienting. It was annihilation of self. The girl who had bent beneath burdens, who had worked until her body screamed, who had sacrificed every dream, had done so believing she was bound by blood to the family she served. But she was not bound. She had never been. She was an outsider, an orphan folded into their story, her very existence rewritten without consent. The trust fund was the dagger twisted deeper. The settlement, intended for her care and education, had been stolen year after year, converted into tuition checks for Elise, housing deposits for Marcus, mortgage payments that kept a roof over everyone's head while she herself labored to pay bills. Every dollar redirected was a theft not only of money, but of her future. Her nights spent hunched over textbooks after double shifts, her mornings walking to work in the freezing dark. Her abandoned dreams of scholarships and freedom, all of it had been unnecessary. The resources had been there, waiting, intended for her. But her adoptive parents had siphoned them away and justified the theft with silence. The scale of betrayal was staggering. She replayed in her mind every moment when she had begged for fairness, when she had asked why she could not pursue college while her siblings did, why she must carry the weight of responsibility alone. The answers had always been the same: there isn't enough. You are strong, you can handle it. Lies. Every word, a carefully crafted manipulation to keep her compliant. Her strength had not been celebrated. It had been exploited. The attic felt suffocating. The air was heavy, walls pressing close, ceiling bowing low. She rose to her feet, knees stiff, body aching from hours on the floor. Her hands moved automatically, gathering the documents, sliding them back into the manila folder with a care that belied her fury. The folder was not just paper. It was truth. It was proof. It was the only weapon she had against decades of deception. She packed with the precision of someone preparing for escape. Clothes into a duffel, essentials into a backpack. The folder clutched tightly as though it might be stolen from her again if she loosened her grip. She moved through the house like a ghost, every creak of the floorboards loud in the silence. Her parents' bedroom door was closed, but she no longer saw it as sanctuary. Elisa's room overflowed with clothes and luxuries purchased on the back of her inheritance. Marcus's electronics hummed faintly in the basement, symbols of privilege she had funded unknowingly. Every corner of the house testified to her stolen future. At the front door she paused, hand on the knob, breath catching in her chest. Leaving meant severing ties, not just with a house but with an entire identity. But staying meant continuing the lie. She pressed down, the latch clicked, and cold air rushed in. Outside, the aftermath of the storm was dazzling. Sunlight fractured across ice-coated branches. The world transformed into glittering glass, but Clarraine saw only shards, jagged and dangerous, a reflection of the wreckage inside her. She stepped out, boots crunching on snow, the duffel strap biting into her shoulder. Each step away from the house was heavy, yet also liberating. She did not look back. The bus ride into downtown Halifax was surreal. She pressed her forehead against the window, watching the city slide past snowbanks piled high, sidewalks coated in salt, storefronts opening for the day. Around her, strangers shuffled in winter coats, clutching coffee cups, unaware that she was in the midst of an existential collapse. She envied their ordinariness, but envy quickly hardened into resolve. She would not remain ordinary in her suffering. She would transform it into justice. By the time she checked into a small room above a hardware store, her decision was made. She would not return. She would not explain. She would not beg for understanding from those who had never given it freely. Her life with them was over. The silence of the room pressed in. But it was a different silence than the attic. This one carried possibility. She spread the documents out again, studying them with new purpose. Adoption records, trust fund agreements, death certificates, legal settlements, all pieces of a puzzle she now understood. She needed help to wield them properly. She needed the law. Her hands shook as she searched for firms on her old laptop, the glow of the screen lighting her determined face. Each click felt like a step into a world she had been denied but was ready to claim. When she finally found a firm specializing in trusts and estates, her pulse quickened. She sent the email, attached the scans, and sat back, heart pounding. The message was simple but firm. I need representation. I believe I am the victim of misappropriated trust funds. That night, she allowed herself to cry, not the quiet tears of exhaustion, but the guttural sobs of grief. Grief for the parents she never knew, whose intentions had been erased. Grief for the child who had been lied to. The teenager who had worked herself raw. The young woman who had sacrificed her dreams. Grief for the life stolen. She cried until her body emptied, until only resolve remained. When dawn came again, she stood at the window, watching Halifax stir to life. Delivery trucks rumbled down icy streets. Students trudged toward classes. Commuters hurried with scarves pulled tight. The city looked ordinary, but within her, something extraordinary had awakened. The obedient daughter was gone. The exploited caretaker was gone. What remained was a woman forged in storms, armed with truth, and ready to reclaim everything stolen from her. The first days after leaving were heavy with silence. In the small room above the hardware store, Clarraine felt both liberated and unmoored. For years, she had been the pulse of a household, her every movement dictated by obligation. Now there were no voices calling her name, no bills placed in her hands, no demands pressing against her ribs. The stillness rang louder than the storm ever had. At first, she paced the room like a prisoner newly freed, unused to deciding how to spend her own hours. She kept the documents close, sometimes spreading them across the bed as though to remind herself that she had not dreamed it. Each page whispered of betrayal, but also of power. They were proof. They were leverage. They were the key to reclaiming what had been hers all along. Her first meeting with Ms. Harding, the lawyer she had found, was both terrifying and electrifying. She sat across the polished table, the folder open between them, her hands cold but steady. Harding's sharp eyes moved quickly over the pages, lips pressed into a thin line. When she finally looked up, her voice was measured, but it carried weight. What had been done to Clarraine was not only immoral, it was unlawful. The words struck like a lightning. For years, Clarraine had been told she was overreacting, dramatic, ungrateful. Now the law itself stood on her side. A case was filed, letters were drafted, and for the first time in her life, she was no longer merely surviving, she was fighting back. The process was long and grueling. Her adoptive parents resisted, sending replies laced with justification and half-truths. They claimed the money had supported the household, that she too had benefited indirectly. They cloaked their theft in the language of love, but the paper trail betrayed them. Tuition checks for Elise, rent for Marcus, credit card statements, vacations, luxuries, every detail was a nail in the coffin of their defense. Months dragged into a year. There were hearings, mediation sessions, confrontations in cold courtrooms where strangers weighed the value of her stolen years. Through it all, Clarraine sat silent but unyielding, the folder of documents always near. When the settlement finally arrived, it was imperfect but undeniable. A portion of the trust could never be recovered, but restitution was ordered in installments. Her father's fiduciary breach had been proven, the law on her side at last. The victory did not feel triumphant. When she signed the settlement papers, her hands trembled with exhaustion more than joy. Justice was never clean. It was smeared with years lost, dreams abandoned, scars etched into her bones. But it was enough. Enough to open doors, enough to reclaim possibilities, enough to step into a future unbound. With restitution, Clarraine enrolled in university. At 27, she walked across a campus filled with students younger, carefree, unscarred. At first she felt like an intruder, an imposter among fresh faces. But soon she realized her difference was her strength. While others treated lectures as obligations, she devoured them as gifts. Every assignment completed, every exam passed, was a brick laid in the foundation of the life she had been denied. She worked too, but now the wages were hers to keep. She rented a small apartment, sparse but warm, filled with books and quiet joy. She bought herself small luxuries, a second-hand bicycle, a new winter coat, dinners with classmates. Each purchase was a rebellion against the years when her earnings had vanished into other people's pockets. Meanwhile, her adoptive family unraveled. Word of the case spread through the neighborhood. Whispers traveled faster than snowmelt in spring. Their reputations fractured, friends turned away, neighbors judged, extended relatives fell silent. Elise, once proud of her degree and her car, found them stained with shame. Marcus withdrew, ashamed of what he had unknowingly taken. James and Marianne grew older in isolation, their faces lined not only by age, but by disgrace. The house that had consumed Clarane's youth became a hollow shell. Clarane did not watch with satisfaction. Vengeance was not sweet, it was solemn. She did not revel in their downfall. She simply acknowledged it as consequence, as balance restored. Their suffering did not erase hers, but it marked the ledger closed. Healing was uneven. Some nights she woke with rage, her body tense, reliving arguments that had already ended. Other nights grief consumed her, grief for Thomas and Elizabeth Winters, parents she never knew, whose intentions had been twisted. Therapy helped. Support groups reminded her she was not alone. Slowly, she stitched together a sense of self separate from exploitation. She began to whisper her birth name, Sophia, in quiet moments, not to erase Clarane, but to honor the child who had been lost in deception. On a cold spring morning, she traveled to New Brunswick to stand at the graves of her birth parents. She laid flowers on the frost-hardened earth, tears slipping down her face, and spoke aloud. She told them she had survived. She told them she was reclaiming the life stolen from her. In the wind that rustled through the trees, she felt an answer, soft and steady. Back in Halifax, she built anew. Friends from university became family by choice, their laughter and support filling spaces that had once been hollow. Professors saw her potential. Colleagues respected her drive. She graduated with honors. Diploma raised high not for absent parents, but for herself alone. Work came meaningful, valued, hers. A marketing firm hired her, recognizing not just her education, but the resilience carved into her bones. Each project, each paycheck affirmed her worth. She was no longer invisible labor, she was seen. Love arrived quietly. Michael entered her life not as savior, but as companion. He listened without judgment when she shared her story. His respect steady, his admiration genuine. With him, she learned that love could be partnership, not sacrifice. For the first time, intimacy felt safe. She did not need him to complete her, but with him, she felt whole. Years later, standing once more by Halifax Harbor, she watched the Atlantic crash against the rocks. The sea roared, but it no longer mirrored her fury. It mirrored her strength. Storms destroyed, but they also cleared. They left behind clarity, space for new growth. Her parents still sent letters sometimes, apologies woven with pleas. She answered when she wished, silence when she did not. Forgiveness, she learned, was not obligation. It was choice, hers alone to grant or withhold. Elise clung to old notions of family, but Clarane no longer bent beneath them. Marcus, repentant, tried to rebuild, and perhaps one day she would allow it, but boundaries held. The past was ash, scattered by storms. From those ashes, Clarane had built herself anew. She was not just the daughter who sacrificed, not just the victim of betrayal. She was survivor, architect, rebuilder. Her life was no longer a story written by others. It was her own, carved in truth and resilience. Clarane Mitchell, Sophia Grace Winters. Names mattered less than the woman she had become. She was free.